Hello everyone. Thank you for joining Anaplan Live Spotlight session today. We'll be discussing why it's critical to start with the business process whenever designing a new application. Hello, my name is Neha and I'm a Master Anaplanner with Adobe India. My association with Anaplan began 4 years back and it has been an interesting journey so far. Looking forward to many more amazing years in the future. If you have any questions for our presenters, please put them in the chat and we'll work to cover them throughout the session. After the session is over, join us at our virtual tables to continue the discussion. With that, let's begin the session. Over to you, Jan. Kindly introduce yourself for our audience, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Jan Sapkins. I'm a business partner in customer success within Anaplan. I've been with Anaplan for nearly 4.5 years. It's been an absolute whirlwind journey, and really enjoying the opportunities that Anaplan has brought around. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome a customer of mine, Metro North, to the session today to talk about how they've basically used the UX process design steps to basically come up with a very, very, very informative way of building out their UX. With that, I'd like to introduce Ben Gee from Metro North. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Neha. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. As Jan said, I'm from Metro North Hospital and Health Service. So just a little bit about myself. I've been working in analytics for the last probably 6 years. And since being at Metro North Hospital and Health Service, done a few roles, but about a year ago, I was asked to look into replacing a business planning process with the Anaplan tool. So I started that journey about a year ago, learning Anaplan as I went and setting up the new business planning framework. A little bit about the health service. So Metro North is quite a large health service. So it's the largest in Queensland. And we've got about 11 directorates, including 5 large hospitals. There's over 15,000 FTE, or about 20,000 staff. And we were asked to build a model that was going to cater for the nursing specifically. So there's over 6,000 nurses that work here at Metro North, and they had a business planning framework that went across the 400 wards and units that we have here at Metro North, and it was going to be used by about 600 users. So they
can you give some geographic spread of how far out the hospitals are within the region that it covers?
Yeah, sure. So from the most southern hospital here, the Royal Brisbane, to I guess the most northern hospital, the Caboolture Hospital, there's probably about 40 kilometres. And then we have a whole bunch of other hospitals and health services and smaller health services throughout that area as well. So yeah, quite a large area and a lot of different facilities and buildings and things like that we work across. So as I said, the nursing team have a business planning framework that they need to do to set up their work when they're setting up their workforce for each ward or unit. So they're required to do basically a workforce model where they put in a standard roster. They also do a lot of work around calculating their recruit to FTE numbers. That involves all covering all their unplanned leave, training hours, recreation leave. So there's a lot of calculations around that as well. And they also have a vacancy management tool where they actually put all the staff in and then they compare that to their planned numbers. So that was basically the crux of the original model, which was built in Excel. So as you can imagine, to cover 400 wards and units with Excel spreadsheets, it was quite a laborious task. So each spreadsheet had to be customized for each ward and set up and then distributed. And then obviously the hardest part, once you've collected all that data, was putting it all together and looking at it, looking at it in a consolidated way. So consolidating all of the data so you can see where the pain points are, rather than looking at it ward by ward.
I believe this is a legislative procedure as well, right? So you actually have to get legislation approval on whatever is presented as part of this, isn't that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the process is done, and then the outputs are all submitted to the units, the unions, and everything. So it's all a legislated process. So there's certain nurse to patient ratios that they have to make, which is why it's so important for the nursing workforce to do this business plan. So that was basically the idea was we were going to create a digital platform that would replace all of these Excel spreadsheets, hundreds of Excel spreadsheets and pages within them. So we set out and we decided we're going to use the Anaplan tool. So in the beginning, what we did was we got a proof of concept model built in conjunction with Anaplan. So we had Simon from Anaplan helping us build a proof of concept model to make sure that it was going to do the baseline. So it was going to do what the Excel spreadsheets did now, basically. So we got that model built. And all the calculations were functioning, everything was lining up. So we decided we were going to pursue it and look at it. Also, once we developed that original proof of concept model, it was clear that there was going to be other advantages to having it in a digital platform. So it was decided that from there, what we were going to do is expand on the process. And once it was in the digital platform, we were going to be able to load phasing information for the wards and units so that we could look at the data trended throughout the year, which was previously done externally by their business managers or finance managers on the ward. So we're going to be able to incorporate that process, obviously save them a lot of time as well. So that was, and then also as an output, it would really help the nurses with rostering if we could give them that phased view on hand whenever they need it to pull out and put into their rosters. So that was the additional work that we thought once we had the POC that we'd be able to add to it. And we decided that we were going to use the new UX for this application. Previously, Metro North had used Anaplan for financial functions, for forecasting, and some planning and audits and things like that. So we thought we've already got Anaplan. They've got this new user experience. Let's see what we can do with it. For this BPF model, a business planning framework. So we decided to go down the path of the UX. Now, in the lead up, sorry, yeah.
A quick question. So you mentioned there were 6,000 nurses that basically work in the various wards, but how many users would you actually cover as part of this use case?
So once it's all rolled out, it is rolled out now, we have around 600 users that are going to be using the BPF. So it's quite a large user group and much, much bigger than Metro North had dealt with in their financial models in the past. So it was quite an undertaking. But as a bit of background, what they did in the workforce team to try and help lead up to this digital transformation is they started to try and make sure that everyone was using consistent models, but different wards had different needs. So, a theatre might have a different need to an inpatient ward, and then outpatient wards different again. So they ended up with 4 modalities that they set up templates for, and we were tasked with recreating those templates. Now, as they go through the planning process, the nurses are essentially following a pathway. So once they've got their bed numbers in for an inpatient ward, say, then they move on to their roster, then they move on to their recruit to calculations, then their phasing, and their final output, which is the roster. So we wanted to make that pathway clear for them in the design, but obviously having 4 different modalities, it became a little more complex. So we split it out. I'll just share my screen with you here and take you through how we went about that plan.
While we are sharing the screen, Ben, when these pathways were defined, was there any feedback that was received from the users such as to smoothen out the process and bring in more user buy-in for the things that were being developed?
Yeah, sure. So we set up a user group meeting. We also had a technical user group meeting, and we also had the steering committee. So as we were going through with these plans, they would be presented, and we'd get all the buy-in back from the end users, which made it a lot better when it actually went out into the services, because they felt like they'd had some input into how it was going to function. So as I say, there was 4 modalities that were identified. So we had the inpatient wards, the emergency wards, the outpatient wards, and then obviously the theatres as well for surgery. Now, they all had different requirements and different ways of planning their workforce. Theatres, for instance, have a 4-week interchanging roster. Inpatients are dependent on how many open beds they have. And then emergency and outpatient, we found pretty much followed the same pathway. So I looked at what each of the wards, each of the different modalities was going to have to do as they went through their planning process, and did this little map here. So basically I looked at it and said, all right, well, the inpatient wards are going to have to start with a beds page. Then they would move straight through to their roster, and their recruit to phasing and phase roster. So they would need 5 pages. Emergency and outpatient, we're going to need 4 pages, both the same, so we can run them through the same pathway. And then theatres have a totally different pathway with 2 separate roster inputs as well for direct and indirect. So this allowed me to set the UX up as a kind of a web page with links to make sure that once someone was on that pathway, they'd stay on that pathway and only see the relevant information to them.
And I might just point out there, this particular process that you were doing, there's a new methodology out for the UX called user, which stands for understand, sketch, execute, and repeat. And essentially what you've done in this phase is that understand part, which is where you've identified the roles, you've tried to identify what are the different components of the process that it will cover. So just want to make sure people are aware of that methodology, and that is essentially what you've covered in this particular part of the design.
Great. Okay, cool. Yeah, so then the other part of it, there's a few modules that are used by everyone. So administrative and also viewing modules for reporting, etc. So we've set those up for everybody. Also, what I did was I looked at which modules were going to be used on each of the pages that I was going to set up in the UX. So obviously these are the pages, and then these are all the modules that sit on those pages. And then you've got all your service profile modules and your VMP.
And once again, that was probably a really good way to help you set up your security as well.
Yeah, definitely. And when we get into the model, you'll see there's quite a complex workflow system in the model. We knew that from the beginning that it was going to have that. Basically, every step of the pathway gets ticked off by multiple users or multiple roles as we've set them up in Anaplan. And I'll show you a little bit of that when we get into the model. So I might just bring up the model now, actually. So this is basically the main page. So all the users are directed to go straight into the main menu, and then all of the navigation for the model actually happens on the pages. So you can see there we've got the 4 modalities, and then down here we've got the review items that I mentioned before that are relevant to everybody. So we'll just have a look at the inpatient pathway, and I'll take you through a little bit of what we did. So obviously going back to that, this planning document here, the inpatient wards start at the beds. So you can see they'll go straight into their beds page here, and then they can enter all of their beds. Just got a demo ward set up here with some dummy data for you to have a look at as we go through. But yeah, so we've got the beds page there for the inpatient ward, and this is those workflows that I was telling you about. So another little thing that we did when we did the model was I wanted to make everything really clear for everybody as to what point they were at in the pathway. So obviously this is that inpatient pathway. It refers straight back to this document that we were looking at before. And then if you were to go into any of the other modalities, they follow those pathways with separate pages. In order to do that, you have to create a separate page for each of the modalities, so that all the links are always going to refer back to the correct page. If they want to go back in the process, this will only go to the inpatient beds. And likewise, when they go to the recruit to FTE, it's the inpatient recruit to FTE.
And I can see some really good style guides there. Can you run us through some of the things that you've done there?
Yeah, sure. So when we were building it in the UX, we wanted to make it really visual. The nurses don't necessarily sit in front of their computers all day, so they're not normally very tech savvy or yeah, they're not. Yeah, they're not sitting in the model all day. It's something they'll go to at the end of the day. They might need to look at their VMT or something like that, but it's not something that they're working in constantly. So we wanted to make it really easy to use. So if we go back to that pathway, what I've done is I've color coded all of the links. So basically, once they've finished it, if you can see here, if they've gone past the beds input, that link will change to a lighter blue. And as you go through to the recruit to, obviously the roster input tab, the roster input icon would go to that lighter blue as well. So it just kind of gives them that past and future tense, so they can see where they're at right now and what they need to do next. So we tried to set it up in that fashion. And to do that, I just mapped out a bit of a style guide. So you'll see in the model there that we've got our Metro North banner or logo, if you like. So what I've done is I've just taken all of the color codes from that, and then I've downloaded a bunch of icons just from a free icon site in a couple of the different colors, so that I can use that in the model. And then obviously just loaded all these links straight into the model, and we reuse that for a bunch of different models now. So it's not just used for the BPF. So we've created a really good image store that we share in the team, and then we refer back to these color codes for all of our styles as well. Yeah. So another thing, as I mentioned, a big part of this process is the sign-off process. So you've got the workflows here. Now, what they wanted to do was have independent workflows for each of the processes. So in this case, the line manager would come in. Only the line manager role has access to the module that drives this field here. So they're the only ones that can tick that off. Likewise, if they haven't approved it, then the director is unable to approve it. If they say that an assistant director is required, then the assistant director would also need to tick it off. But we don't always have assistant directors, so that's that bypass has been set up there. So you can see once I've done one, then I can go in and I can do the director and the facility director. And the exec director can sign it off. And the model gets locked down when the line manager has ticked off theirs, because they're the one responsible for inputting the data. So we've got a separate set of workflows on the roster construct. So you can see we've ticked it off on beds. Beds is done, but we also need all of those approvals again for the roster construct as well. So you can see it's locked at the moment. The line manager can currently go in and untick and keep working on the roster. But if the line manager was to approve the roster and then the director was to approve it as well, the line manager can no longer go back and edit. So the director can lock them out.
And yeah, I think, Ben, to activate such kind of approval workflow, I think DCA would be what we have activated on these checkpoints.
Exactly. Yeah. So a whole bunch of dynamic cell access was used in order to set this up. So if we go into the actual model itself, I'm going to the system modules here, and you can see I've got all these workflow modules here. So you've got the manager one. Ooh, that's interesting. I'll just read
must be a glitch.
Oh, okay. Bear with me for just 1 second.
No problem. I think while Ben sorts this out, yeah, I think, Ian, I think it would be very informative and helpful if you can speak about your journey with Metro North and with Ben in the planning and in the implementation process.
Absolutely. No, it was. It's been an amazing journey with him. As I mentioned, I joined Anaplan 4.5 years ago, and Metro North was probably one of the first customers I actually reached out to in Brisbane, where we're based, for an introduction of myself, given that I was appointed here. And I've worked with Ben and Chris and the team that was there for the last 4.5 years, basically just trying to assist with capability and enablement. And when this particular piece of work came about, as Ben mentioned, the The build started as a POC with our solutions consulting team, but given the capability in the team, once that POC was built out, through supporting Ben and the team, we could basically productionize the solution. And that's how it basically got stood up, which is an incredible achievement. If you think of it, that went from concept to go live without, too much of an effort from the customer side, which is pretty impressive. Since then, we've worked, we basically have a weekly cadence that we work on to cover anything, any major issues that may have come up during the week, support issues that they may potentially have raised, or any new modeling scenarios that has happened. For instance, Ben's recently built a new model to do with a longer term strategic plan. And it's through these cadence calls that we get the ability to understand, one, what the customer is doing, but also how we can support them. And also, given that we've got so many changes happening in the UX, what are the new features that could potentially be of benefit to them? So we really see that regular touch point as a really good enabler for us as Anaplan to understand what customers are doing, but also to make sure that customers know what's changing in the world of Anaplan on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I've got it back up now.
Yeah.
My apologies for that.
Great timing.
All good.
Yeah.
All good.
Can you see it? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So going into the models. So we're talking about the workflows. So basically what I needed to do is set up the workflows. So you can see we've got all the different pages that the nurse unit managers would go through and tick off their approvals in here. And then some other items and images, which I'll show you what they're for later. But yeah, so they would tick these off. And then that one obviously has DCA, which links to the director module as well. So the director module has DCA on it, linking back to the manager, saying that they basically can't tick it off until the line manager has ticked off theirs. So that's that. And also we've got the DCA on the nurse unit manager one, which links back to the director one, saying that if the director has ticked off theirs,
Yep.
they can no longer untick theirs. So, yeah, so it does get quite complicated. But going back to that that planning document, knowing which modules are being affected was really key in drawing up that map and how it was going to work, and also knowing which modules were going to be on one page. As we had the workflows aligned to the pages with multiple modules, we needed to know where all that was going to have to be applied. We've got all.
Ben, I can also see your functional areas really closely relate. If you just collapse the system one, I can see that also really closely relates to the modalities and the scenarios that you've got there.
Yeah, certainly. So all of the modules are grouped up with the UX in mind. So they all refer basically to a page, apart from the system ones, obviously. And a couple of test modules that we've been working on, but everything else applies straight back to the UX. So everything was done with the UX in mind. So when we were building it out, that was really key, was making sure that it all linked to how it was going to look in the front end, rather than trying to retrofit something we'd built into the UX. We built it kind of hand in hand. So that's how that all went about. Also, obviously, with the workflows, as I said, with those modules, only certain roles. So we've got a number of roles in there, and only certain roles are going to have access to these modules, obviously. So if we look at the roles, we've got our so we've got all of our nurse unit managers are going to be the only ones with access to that nurse unit manager workflow, and same with the directors, etc. So yeah, so that's a bit about the workflows. I'll just go back to.
When there's an interesting question that I received from a user, Alvin. So they're asking about if the app is configured for mobile, and do we know what is the usage rate if it's configured?
Yeah, so the usage rate is right up there. So it's almost at 100% of the users who have access right now. It's as I say, it's a legislated process, so it's something that they have to do. It has been well received though, but the users themselves are required to go in and use it. And also, one thing I haven't touched on yet is the vacancy management tool. So there's a vacancy management tool in here as well, where the managers are able to put the individual staff in and then refer that back to the roster. So they had to, so they have to use that all the time. So staff are changing, staff hours are changing a lot. So the vacancy management tool, which I'll show you in a second, is something that they use almost on a daily basis. So usage is quite high, and it's been really well received. So, yes, sorry, and the mobile usage question. Also, it has not been configured for mobile yet. I have looked at it on a mobile device. The way it's set up with the workflows and everything at the moment, we would have to custom make certain modules that are going to work well with the mobile app. So we have looked at it. It's not something that's required in our service at the moment. So not all the wards are using iPads or anything like that. And the nurses need to be on the secure network to use their phones in order for them to be able to use their phones, which most of them are not. So at the moment, it's not something we required, so we didn't really look into that. But I have thought about it and how it would work. We did look at it for another model. So we looked at it when we were setting up a bed audit model in Anaplan, and we did look at a mobile usage site for that application. But as I say, for this one, wasn't really required. I'll just go. So
and,
yeah, so
and
the
another one. So what is required for navigating from one page to another, within this dashboard? So how is it set up like that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And actually that leads into something else that I forgot to mention about the setup as well. So this is our inpatient template. And you can see here that our links are just a link to page. So once all the pages have been set up, then basically I've just dropped an image there. I've put in a new title name, and then I've put in a link to page and said where it needs to go. So I've tagged all of the page names with the modality reference as well, so that when I'm setting it up, I can go through all of that. Another thing we did as well is in the model itself. So we have all of the wards set up and set up with their modality reference in a separate module. So we've got their modality allocated for all of the wards throughout the health service. And then what we've done is we've used that modality to filter the options in the front end. So you can see that my ward drop down here has been filtered by that modality module. So I've just applied a filter in the front end so that if you're on the inpatient pathway, you can only select an inpatient ward. And same goes for all of the others as well.
So that's ensuring that consistency between the pathways and making sure that there's just not a risk of somebody cross-contaminating data in other areas.
Exactly, yeah. So from a user perspective, it's impossible to go into an inpatient template and select an outpatient ward and start entering data. So it won't work. But yeah, even though they're using the same modules, so the modules themselves, so if I'm on the roster construct, the roster construct is used for emergency, inpatient, and outpatient. So it's the one module. So there's only one module, but it sits on all the different pages for all the different modalities. So they're all hitting that independently. So the other thing that we worked into it, obviously, is the review items. So we did a bit of reporting around it. So they're able to go in here. And this was really key for the workforce team because previously, as I said, consolidating the data at a facility level or a service line level, a grouped up level, any grouping of it was very, very difficult. So you were having to bring in data from multiple Excel spreadsheets to try and analyze it. Now we have it all in the one place, all in the digital platform. So that's working really, really well. So we've got their budget reporting there. So we're working on some roster reporting once we get some roster inputs in. We have their workflows as well. So if they go into the workflow reporting, they can see where they're at and what is still to be approved across the different levels. So I've done this with images at the moment. I could have done it in a table. Just thought I'd make it a little bit more visual. So you can see there that this is an outpatient or emergency ward. If I was to go to, I'll go back to my demo one. I'm on the wrong year too. I'm on my development model. So it is running ALM. So I have my development and my production model. So the UX has been really cool. I can go into my dev model once I've made a change, check to see how it looks before I actually push the review tag to my production model and have a look at it there. So that's been really, really handy. I know that only came out recently, but yeah, before that, I was basically, oftentimes I'd make a change in the development model, update my review tag, and then find that in the production model, I had to make a tweak, which meant going back to the dev model, new revision tag. That's no longer the case. So here we can see the workflows. These are the finance roles, so they only have limited items that they have to mark off, and then you've got your nursing roles here, and then you can see who's ticked what in the process, and they can select their ward and have a look at it there. So that's a relatively new item, so we've just developed that. And I think aside from that, with the VMT was the other thing. So this is the item said that was used most frequently by nurses. So this is where they would actually put in all of their individual staff. I've just put some dummy data in this one. So this is where they would put in all of their individual staff and then their active hours, and then we could refer that back to the recruit to number to see if they need to look at recruiting and what sort of vacancy rate they've got. Vacancy rate is one of their KPIs. So that's a metric we look at. Obviously, this is a test or a dummy ward, so you can see the vacancy rates not quite accurate there. But
And I believe you also incorporated a lot of textual stuff into the model as well. That's part of a report.
Textual? Or, oh, yes, sorry. Yeah. So,
yep.
So as I said, so going back to right at the beginning of the presentation, this is a legislative process. So there is a document that comes out of the back of the planning tool that needs to be submitted to the unions to make sure that we're hitting nurse to patient ratios and things like that. So if I go back to the menu, we set up the service profile. So the service profile, this gets exported as a PDF and gets submitted straight from there. So previously, they were collecting a whole bunch of information from the model and they were putting it into a Word document. Every ward had to do one, and then they were being submitted to the unions to show that they were doing what was legislated. So now, as I say, the document's been built in. We've got the free text items for them there. They've got the approval process on it as well, and they're able to go in here, enter all of the information about their service, and then down the bottom it has some tables that come straight from the planning tool itself. So they have their productive nursing, and there's a couple other things. But yeah, so that PDF's quite well. We've got our banner on it and everything. I had to leave the navigation off this one because obviously this gets sent off as it is. So once the PDF comes out, that'll be the complete document.
So you touched on it briefly about, how was it received? But I mean, in general, have you started looking at what sort of time savings you've been able to achieve, given you've gone from the Excel model to the digital platform and also from that consolidation piece, I suppose? Is there anything that sort of have come out of that and how the users have reacted to the new process?
Yeah, so all in all, the experience, the users have come back with pretty positive feedback on it. It does a lot more than what the Excel model used to do. So yeah, it's been really appreciated. As for time saving, we did plan to do a time in motion study prior to developing the model, but with COVID hitting and everything like that, we didn't get to do that. We do know that the nursing workforce team themselves spend weeks setting up each BPF every year for use by the nurses. So that process now is essentially redundant, that we can just roll the model forward and redistribute. So we'll add a year to the model, and we keep going. So yeah, it's been really great. It's going to save a whole bunch of time on the wards, and also for the workforce, the central workforce team that we have here as well. Aside from that, we've also found some really good benefits of having that consolidated data. Like I said, that was one of the hardest things to do previously, was look at the consolidated data. So I'll just look at some aggregate data here from one of our actual wards. So this is the report that comes out of their vacancy management tool. And one of the things and we're seeing this consistently across a lot of wards, one thing that was really hard to identify previously was how we were doing as far as skill mix was concerned. So you can see, for instance, from this model here, if we look at our plan versus how many active staff they actually have, you can see that we've switched a lot of FTE into the higher grades. So we're using the higher grades a lot more than we're using the lower grades in the grade 5s. So essentially what that tells us is that we're using a more expensive workforce for that particular ward. And then obviously we can roll that up as well. So from that ward, we can go to their full service line and look at what it's like at that level. And you can see the mix. Once you add at a ward level, it might only be a couple of staff, but once we add it all up across the wards, we can see that the variances get pretty big. So that's been a really good piece for us to start to analyze and figure out how we're going to fix that, and what we need to do going forward. So yeah, that's
on the
good.
rollout itself. Can I ask, what was the approach taken? Did you do it by facility, or how did you identify the wards that you rolled out, and how quickly have you what was the go live period looking like?
So the go live period, originally we had planned, I think it was about a 6-month go live rollout, and that all kind of got condensed. So it was pushed back a little bit through a whole bunch of different things going on, COVID cases popping up in Brisbane, which was changing the layout and obviously people's workloads. So essentially we started the rollout in November last year, and the original plan was to go out and, as I say, spend 6 months doing a rollout. We actually got it rolled out by February. So that's 400 wards and about 600 users that we rolled out to within a 4-month period. So we had pilot wards. So we had the surgery ward at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, which is our main hospital. And we also had our community services as a group, as a pilot ward, because community themselves are also running a multidisciplinary model. So their model doesn't just include nursing. So we had to work with them in the beginning. And then them and surgery were our pilots. So we tested everything out on them pre-rollout. And then come November, we started going out to the hospitals and doing one-on-one training with the nurse unit managers. So I'm lucky enough to have the nursing workforce team that works upstairs. So there's about 5 people in that team, and they were able to go out and sit with the staff. Obviously, they were with us for the development of the model, so they had the biggest input in the development of the model. So they all had a really good understanding of how it worked. So they were able to pass on that training, which was developed by them as well. So.
And one last question is did you, I believe you also set up the model that this is the nursing workforce team, that they could manage the addition of new wards and specify rules and things in the model. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. So there's a bunch of different items in the model itself, like the modality, and also there's certain wards can only see certain pay grades and things like that. So there's a lot of different filters in there that that can be adjusted for each ward. So what I did was I set them up their own dashboard with a set of controls, rather than having them go into, I'll just look at the ward maintenance one here. So it's not the prettiest of model because it's more of something that they use internally. But this is where they can manage changes to a ward. So I'm at a grouped up level there. So if we go to a ward, so you can see they've got, they can select the valid combinations of ward to pay grades. And then they can create a new ward. If they need to create a ward, they can do that in the model. We've just got a form set up there. They need to load the grades through when they've done. So we've got the load button there for them. This is where they set the modality. Also, some wards are legislated and some wards aren't. So they would tick to say whether it's legislated or not. So we let them manage all of that. This is information that they're privy to. But as the developers, it's not something that, we would know. So we've handed over this dashboard to them so that they can set up things themselves. So yeah, and that's the cost center allocation. So each ward has cost centers allocated for when we bring in external data for budgets and multipliers and things like that. Multipliers is the unplanned leave. So we look at a 3-year average of data on all the unplanned leave metrics. Sorry, Neha, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, Ben. So as we're talking about the POC process, was there any areas where you were able to identify that which ones are the value addition requirements and which one per se are the MVPs that requires to be delivered as part of a particular phase delivery?
So you mean like how do we identify the wards that were going to be used?
And what are the developments which are good to have and can be parked for later releases, and which ones are the necessary to have which needs to be released during the initial phases?
Sure, yeah. So when it was all being done, as I said, we had a steering committee and a technical user group and also a user group as well. So whenever issues or development opportunities were found in the model, those things were presented at the steering committee or the technical user group, whichever best suited for what it was. So what we would do is we would say someone asked for an enhancement to the model. We would take that to our technical user group and we would explain the problem, explain the workload, and basically do a prioritization of what needed to be done versus what we could do. So we did it in phases. So we did phase 1. So we set up phase 1 and we said, all right, phase 1, the model is going to do this, and we listed off the key things that the model had to do as part of phase 1. And then we went and looked at items that could possibly be held over to phase 2. So essentially with phase 1, we were able to deploy the model to make it operational. And then phase 2 adds a lot of nice to haves and things like that. Obviously, though, along the way, things come up that just need to be fixed. So that happened a lot. So especially through testing and things like that. But that's basically how we addressed it. So everything was grouped into phases. Yeah.
Okay. And one interesting question I have from a user, Nakul. So they're asking about how do you prefer the navigation to be? So we have currently images linked with which we can proceed forward to the next pages. With respect to how it is with context selector or a selector with which we can navigate between the pages. So can you speak about both of these approaches?
As in the native navigation? Is that what they mean?
Yeah.
I would assume they mean the native navigation. So for us, as I say, the nurses, they're not people who are technically working behind a computer. They do a lot of other things around the ward. So this was a tool that we wanted them to be able to jump into and just know where to go. Obviously, once we set it up for all the different modalities, if we go back to the app contents, we can do groupings and things, and there is groupings on the page, but from a navigational perspective, when someone only needs to go through, say, 4 or 5 tabs, it was much easier for them as a front-end user to set it up in this fashion where we just had the icons to navigate through. We have other models, though, in the service that are used in our finance team, and they use the native navigation in some of those as well. So, but yeah, the native navigation, as saying it, for us, they wanted something that the key was to make it easy to use. They had spreadsheets that they'd been using for a long time. We were going to a digital platform. If we had made it more complicated, we were going to get a lot of pushback. So we just wanted to make it nice and easy to use, basically.
Yeah. And one other question from Gian. So Can you speak about the security which has been configured to keep users out of other modalities?
Out of other modalities? Yes,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so so essentially that wasn't necessarily a security thing. So if someone has access to a ward, just say I'm the nurse unit manager of demo, which is the ward that I set up for our presentation today. I'll just put that in. So if I'm the nurse unit manager of demo, now demo is set as an inpatient modality. And if I was the unit manager, I would only see this one ward when I go into the model. So it's an inpatient one. So if I go into the inpatient template, I can select my ward. If I was the nurse unit manager and of that ward, and I was to go into say the outpatient template. Now, outpatient will go straight to the roster construct. And I was to search for my ward. Oh, I don't think it'll come up. Hang on. Yeah, all right. So I can't select my ward in here because this is an outpatient template. So it finds it in the list. It knows it's in the wards, but I can't actually select it. So as the nurse unit manager for demo, I will only be able to use the inpatient template. Now, the way I've set that up, as I was shown before, so the way I've set that up is I've just put a filter on the actual selector itself. So I've gone to my ward modality module, which is this one here. And I've said the rule is outpatient must be true. So we can see that you got the Boolean there. So once outpatient is selected for that ward, that just ticks the box. And yeah, that's basically it. So as I said in the beginning, outpatient and emergency actually run on the same pathway. So you can see I'm showing outpatient and emergency wards in this one. So that's basically how I set it up. That was really that was really straightforward setup. So yeah, but as I say, from a workflow perspective, if I'm a unit manager of one ward, I'm only going to see that ward. So there's literally only one place that I can put my data.
Okay. And one other question. So how did you train the users? Did you use Anaplan videos on the new UX to help them with the training? Or did you build your own customized learning material for them to be able to onboard it to this new platform?
Yeah, the nursing workforce team developed training in conjunction with us specifically for this model. So yeah, so they developed their own training, and as I say, they went and facilitated it as well. So my understanding is they did a bunch of videos and documentation, but then also did those one-on-one sessions with them as well, and then gave them the videos and everything for reference. But we left that to them. We had a really good project team with the nursing workforce guys who were able to set all that up. So we were lucky that we could just develop. Cool.
Ben, thank you from my side. I don't have any further questions. Thank you so much for presenting this and walking through the process and how the UX basically came alive. Nia, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Wasn't it a super enriching session? Thanks to Ben and Ian for sharing this expertise and valuable insight. Thank you all for joining us in this discussion. Please visit us on our virtual tables right after this session. To navigate there, click on the networking tab on the top and we'll see you there. Thank you all.